Welcome back to the Global Business Report. Global debt has hit an all-time high of $188 trillion, which is more than double the output of the global economy. While private sector borrowing accounts for the vast majority of the total, the rise puts governments and individuals at risk if the economy slows. IMF chief further called for steps to ensure borrowing is more sustainable and lending is more transparent.
Because debt has reached all-time high levels, 188 trillion, the equivalent of 230% of world output. Public debt in advanced economies is at levels not seen since the Second World War. Emerging markets public debt is at level not seen since the 1980s debt crisis. And low-income countries are witnessing sharp increases in their debt burdens over the last 5 years. Bottom line, debt burdens have left many governments, many companies, many households vulnerable. First, we need to ensure that borrowing is more sustainable. This means proceeding carefully in making a judgment on taking new debt, focusing more on attracting equity-based investment, FDI, boosting tax revenues so we are on a sound basis when we borrow more, and stepping up the fight against red tape and corruption.
Chief Georgieva, reflection on concerns over global debt. And for more on this, Adim Okwesa, an associate analyst from Financial Derivatives, joins me in the studio. Adam, good morning.
Good morning. Good morning. Yeah.
All right, let's talk about this. Well, $188 trillion is a lot, no doubt. So the rising global debt, how would you rate concerns so far? Are the red flags flying at this rate?
Yeah, certainly 188 trillion. That's certainly a staggering figure. 230% of global GDP. If you put that in a vacuum, there's certainly a need to ensure that your physical buffers, your public debt buffers are at a manageable level in order to create space to prepare for the next economic downturn. Because if you look at it, monetary policy is already constrained in the sense that central banks have little or no room to lower interest rates to combat the next downturn. So the next thing is fiscal policy. Fiscal policy, if your domestic revenue is underperforming, you need to take on more debt. If your debt levels are already at a unsustainable level, then you're in an unfortunate situation. So there's certainly a need to reduce our public debt levels. But I think the more important metric is your debt servicing as a percentage of GDP. For advanced economies, whereas public debt is rising, but debt servicing is declining, albeit at a gradual pace. So advanced economies like the US, EU, Japan, they are at a comfortable level at this point. But the same cannot be said for emerging market economies, particularly African economies. Emerging market economies have taken on debt to finance infrastructure projects. And if we combine that with fast depreciating currencies, then you can see that they are at a risk of debt distress. I think the IMF, the World Bank released a report in late 2018 stating that 11 out of 28 low-income African countries are at risk of debt distress.
All right.
So that's certainly a cause for concern.
Indeed, it is. We've already heard comments from the BOE and, of course, the US Fed on rates as regards the economy, as you just alluded to. So are the concerns justified at this rate?
Yes, indeed. If it's a divided opinion. Some say this rising debt level is a ticking time bomb, whereas some people say it's just an alarm fueled by misinformation. But
the IMF's got their statistics, and they're on top of that.
Yes, certainly, without question.
Yeah.
The accumulation of debt certainly carries some risks. That's without question. That's why, in my opinion, there's a need to place greater reliance on domestic sources of income, in particular tax receipts, to finance your long-term development needs.
I was going to talk to you about that. There's been calls to place emphasis on raising domestic revenue, as it were, to reduce that. So how is this reflecting on VAT? So can we use Nigeria for your explanation on that?
Yes, certainly. Nigeria is a good example. Public debt as a percentage of GDP is at a very comfortable level, but our debt servicing as a percentage of revenue is almost 70%.
Yeah.
So that is certainly a challenge. That's why we need to do all we can to raise our revenue, particularly non-oil revenue.
Yeah.
So the government just implemented a VAT hike to 7.5%. People are divided about that. Some say yes, it's a step in the right direction, but people are saying yes, it would place, for poor people, the low-income people will be mostly affected. But in my opinion, yes, I think you should, apart from raising VAT, there are lots of things you can do to raise more tax revenue. For example, widening your tax base, doing everything you can to formalize your informal sector. Little things like making it easier to register your business, making it easier to pay your taxes. But at the same time, I think Nigerian citizens face a catch-22 situation. They say, why would I want to pay taxes when the quality of public services is poor?
So it's not reflective on their way of life.
But the government will now say, we need your tax revenue to improve our public service revenue. So it's quite a challenge. But I think without question, we certainly need to do what we can to raise our non-oil revenue. I think the rise in VAT is a step in the right direction. All
right, but I'm still going to go to the debt issue now. So how would you rate Nigeria's input to the rising global debt? I can just imagine out of that 188 trillion naira, or dollars, as it were. So are current efforts to manage it enough, you think? Our debt?
Well, yes, I think there's certainly been a shift in focus, certainly, for example, in Africa, for example, whereas I remember in 2014, 2013, Ghana was in an economic mess because it borrowed heavily and squandered those resources to fund higher wages for public sector employees. But now there's a shift in focus, whereas you're borrowing heavily, but you're using those funds for productive uses, to fund massive infrastructure. Yes,
you're right.
To fund massive infrastructure projects, which will in turn deliver long-term economic benefits. So we're certainly seeing that focus. There's more scrutiny, there's certainly a need for more transparency, more scrutiny on governments to use those revenues that you borrow, use those funds you borrow for productive uses to fund infrastructure rather than for recurrent expenditure like paying wages and so on and so forth. Yeah, so certainly we're seeing a shift in governments, yes.
And it's interesting you should use Ghana because right now it's one of those countries that have been touted as being the fastest growing in terms of just after Rwanda, Kenya, as it were. So there's a major shift they must have done so far. So let's talk about multiple debts, federal and state level, still on the Nigerian scenario here. So how's that impacting on our ability to maintain our reserves? Definitely there's a depletion here. And like you alluded to, there's a lacuna between what the money is actually used for and how reflective it is for infrastructural projects, as it were.
Yeah, that's a tricky issue because in state governments, I think the main focus is to fund the minimum wage payments. Most state governments, unfortunately, are highly indebted. So,
and they're still having that issue currently lingering, you're right.
So that's why I think you're taking on money just to pay to clear off your arrears. So I don't see that situation changing anytime soon. I think unless we do everything we can to raise our internal generated revenue, raise our non-oil revenue, then that's the only panacea I see. But we're still stuck in this vicious cycle of borrowing money just to clear your arrears, yes, and that's unfortunate,
Yes, we've seen an increase in VAT recently. So how would you gauge the mood, response to that? Are we going to see some positive response to it? You've already alluded to the fact that, okay, Nigerians might not be a little bit hesitant here. But in terms of corporate organizations who, to a large extent, contribute to a large part of that debt, So what do you make of that scenario?
Yes, I think, certainly this VAT increase is a step in the right direction. I think the government has said it would introduce some palliatives for the low-income people, whereas they would exempt some VAT increases on certain goods, just to
But these are palliatives we should see because it's one thing
they should make it transparent. Indeed. They should make it transparent. But for corporates, yes, I think even that 7.5%, I think it's still too low. It's one of the lowest, and it will be one of the lowest in the world. So certainly, yes, I think it's certainly a step in the right direction. All these corporates, high-income people, middle-income people need to do what they can to pay their taxes and increase our non-oil revenue.
Okay. So still back to the debt issue. It's one thing to have a debt and it's another thing to manage it. So to a large extent, are we on the right path to making headway here? Because sometimes it's mind-boggling. We're still borrowing from IMF. Just the other day ago, I think Nigeria borrowed some billions of naira towards the power sector, as it were. And you tend to think, you're trying to control this, you're trying to manage this, and then, yes, they do say you need this money for developmental purposes, but that's another scenario here.
Yeah, that's the situation now. We do not raise enough money. We come up with unrealistic revenue projections. We do not tax revenue. Not all revenue, non-revenue. They frequently, persistently underperform. So to make up for that deficit, what do? We borrow more money. But I think the good news is that these funds are on concessionary rates. They are very low interest rates, 2%, 3%.
Yeah.
So that is the positive thing. So and they are long tenors, 10, 15 years. So on that note, we're in a very comfortable position. I don't think we would, and I don't see Nigeria being at any risk of falling into any debt trap or any debt distress. So the only concern is that debt servicing as a percentage of revenue, 70%. That's too high. So we need to raise our revenue. Yeah, that's
indeed, you're right. Now, it's when it comes to even giving out these loans from the international agencies, from the IMF, the World Bank, you would think there should be some kind of mechanism to control how the money is being spent. But they're usually silent on that. And what you have is, rise in that. We're not seeing whatever has been given reflective on, So it behoves on the IMF to at least do something on that as well?
Yes. I know that the IMF and the World Bank, particularly with countries that have a high perception of corruption, that are highly placed on the corruption perception index. Unfortunately, Nigeria was one of the countries. There are certain preconditions and certain mechanisms that if we're borrowing this money, you have to use it for this certain purpose. You need to show that you've used this money to fund this thing. So there's increased scrutiny on governments like Nigeria, and that, of course, we have to be transparent with these institutions.
Yes, indeed, we need to be. Adim Okwesa, Financial Derivatives. I'd like to thank you very much for your thoughts on this issue. Good to have you.
Thank you.